Likutei Sichos, Chelik Chav Zayin, volume 27, the second Sicha of Tazria. This Sicha will explain the intrinsic connection, that inherent connection between the Kohen and the termination of the Negat Tzaras, the impurity of the Tzaras, which is basically an affliction that comes about on the skin and causes one to be impure. And an amazing and very, very practical directive lesson in life as to how our approach has to be, our attitude towards each and every Jew. As an introduction, so we can better flow through the Sicha. So this parsha discusses primarily the various skin afflictions, the various tzaras that one can have, the negoim. Negoim means the various shades, the various skin tone afflictions that could render a person tamei, that can make him impure. Now, these are perhaps one of the most complex laws in the Torah, as they are very, very complicated, because a slight, when I say a slight, I mean a microscopic difference in shade, in color, in discoloration of the skin can make the whole difference if or not the person is impure. Now, once the person is determined as impure, again, this is very, very severe in this particular area of impurity. As the person needs to now be isolated, the person has to be separated from everyone and from everything. Other impurities in the Torah, let's say if somebody comes in contact with a dead body, just calls for the person to be restricted, for example, from the Bet HaMikdash or from eating holies. But in this case, the person needs to actively be restricted and isolated from everyone and anything. And he cannot have normal family life, and so on and so forth. So that's something to take note of, take into account. It's going to be crucial for the Sicha. Another thing to be familiar with, there's a concept called Gzerat HaKatuv. That means sometimes in discussing Jewish law, and in discussing sometimes even certain details or aspects of certain mitzvot, sometimes the Talmud does not have a reason for it, does not have any other source other than, quote, Gzerat HaKatuv, which means that this is like literally translated a biblical decree. This is what Hashem wants. And sometimes perhaps we don't even have a reason for it. There's no logic, there's no rationale, not even a biblical, a Torah rationale. Another thing to be familiar with, what is the function of a Kohen? Of course, we know that Kohanim, the priests, they would serve in the Holy Temple. That is one function. But there's another function which is a very primary one, and in fact still exists today, even with the absence of the Beis HaMikdash, and that is as the Kohanim recite in the blessing, in the priestly blessing, before the priestly blessing, in the bracha that they recite on the mitzvah that they're going to do, that is levarech et amo Yisrael be'ahava, to bless his nation Israel be'ahava, with love. Now notice the word with love, not just to bless the people, but to bless them with love. In fact, this leads to the following rule, that the Kohen who's getting up there to bless the people in the congregation must not be in a fight, in any quarrel with anybody present. In fact, some halachic authorities even go as far as saying that if indeed he does, and there isn't true love, that means that the blessing is not really being done correctly, because we say the blessing is only levarech et amo Yisrael be'ahava, then, God forbid, this can actually pose a danger to the Kohen himself, because he's actually meddling with God's blessing. One more last point that we should be familiar with, which is well known, and that is that in general, the whole idea of tzaras, these afflictions, and that brings a person to become tamei, to become impure, and need to be isolated, the sages explain, typically would stem from the terrible sin of speaking lashon hara, speaking bad about others and bad-mouthing other Jews. This Hashem would make the person to be, since he was going to isolate others, he was going to cause a husband, a wife, a brother and brother, or friends to become isolated from one another by means of him speaking gossip about the other. So too, he himself should become isolated. So let's go into the Sicha. So, in reference to the impurity of negoyim, of these afflictions, there are two general rules. Number one, that the actual inspection, in order to make a determination if the person is indeed impure, must be done by one who is a chacham. Chacham literally means a wise person, but meaning an expert in the matter. Doesn't necessarily have to be a Kohen. It has to be somebody who is well versed and trained in this particular area, and he's able to determine if that meets the exact criteria of the Torah to determine the person as impure. However, this brings us to the next point, the actual declaration, the actual determination, meaning the pronouncement that the person is indeed impure, that needs to be done by the Kohen. Even if the Kohen is not well versed and is relying exclusively on the opinion of the expert, which he needs to do. He can't just he can't just announce the person tamei or not if he's not tamei. But even if he's relying on him, he has to hear it from the expert. The expert, who's really the one who understands and knows whether the person is or not tamei, cannot make determination, cannot make the official pronouncement. But it's the Kohen who determines it by making the pronouncement that he's tamei, and later when the person becomes toher, once again, when he becomes pure again after going through the process, the Kohen is the one who pronounces him as toher. So in both stages, again, in short, we need to have the expert who understands the intricate details of the law, but on the other hand, it's the Kohen who actually makes the pronouncement, the announcement as to whether the person is or not pure. Of course, we need to have some insight into this, some clarification. Since at the end of the day, we're relying on the Kohen's words, on the expert's words, what role is the Kohen playing here? Why is it that Hashem made it that only the Kohen, only the priest, can be the one to make the actual verbal determination? And then again, why only in this type of tumah? We don't find such a phenomena in any other type of tumah, that there should be one person who's the expert to make the determination, and only the Kohen, another person of a certain kind, is the one that should be able to make the determination. Now, of course, this falls in to the category of Gzerat HaKatuv, Gzeras HaKasuv. This is a biblical decree. This is God's will. And typically, if it's God's will, that means that there may not be a reason that we can comprehend. There may not be a reason that we know. However, as the Rambam himself explains, that even when the Torah gives us Gzeras HaKasuv, still it's our duty, and I would say also our privilege, to try to understand and to figure out the reason behind it, to figure out the rationale behind it, to the extent that the human mind could understand and appreciate, and typically and especially when this can lead us to enhance our Yirat Shamayim, our fear of Hashem, our service of Hashem. And therefore the question is, what is it over here? True, it's Gzeras HaKasuv, but could we try to understand it? Could we make sense of this? Why is it that only a Kohen is the one who has the right, who has the ability to determine that the person is pure, is tamei or toher, impure or pure? Now the truth is, saying that, it seems that the real function of the Kohen here, the main function, the exclusive function, is not so much to make him pure, but rather to set this person into an impure state. Let me explain. Because once the Kohen is coming back to make him pure, to declare him as he's okay now, and he's pure, and he can go back into society, that already is all still a derivative and a result of the original determination, of the original declaration. Because if the person was never tamei, they would never need to be declared now as tahor. So this goes back to saying that it seems that the main thing here is, the key here is that it's a kohen, it's a priest who can determine that one is impure. Later, it's already just like almost like a byproduct that he also has to come back to declare him as pure. But what is this about declaring a person impure that can only be done by a Kohen, even though the Kohen himself may not know all the intricate laws that apply, that are applicable? The answer is as follows. There's something very unique, as we stated in the introduction, in this particular type of tumah, in this particular area of impurity. And that is, And it sets it apart from all other type of tumas. And that is, as the Torah says, Bodod yeshev b'chutz lanacha. He has to sit isolated outside of the camp. That means, first of all, he has to be isolated from the entire community. But moreover, he has to be isolated not just from the entire community, and he can hang out outside of the city limits together with likewise Mitzrayim, people who have the same level of Tumah. No, even Mechutz Lamachana, even, quote, outside of the camp, even outside of the city limits where he's isolated from society, even there he has to be Badad, he has to be sitting alone, he has to be isolated. And in a spiritual sense, says the Rebbe, in a very more esoteric sense, this is saying that the person is kind of like outside of the realm of spirituality, as if Chas v'Shalom, he is kind of locked out from being connected to Yisrael Goy Kodesh, to the holy nation. He's kind of like outside the realm of holiness. He's isolated, so to speak, from his own people, from his own essence. And this is where the Torah says that in order to establish something so severe, only a Kohen can do it. Why only a Kohen? Because a Kohen, his whole purpose is, as we said in the introduction, Levarech es Ama Yisrael be'ahava. The Kohen is about blessing people with love. The Kohen is about love. And as we know, as the Kohanim are categorized as the first Kohen, who's the ultimate example of what a Kohen is, Aaron HaKohen, Ish HaChesed, a person of the epitome of kindness. And this actually gives a lot of meaning and makes sense to the verse in Shoftim, in Chumash Devarim. If you look in chapter 21, verse 5, where over there it describes the function of the Kohanim. And Hashem says that in them, quote, I'm paraphrasing the verse, in them Hashem chose to serve Him and to bless in the name of Hashem, and according to them will be decided all disputes and all afflictions. So you see that Hashem is making a connection between deciding Chol Nega, all afflictions, all Tzaras, and blessing in the name of Hashem. That it's not two separate functions of the Kohen, but they're all in one verse. This is the essence of a Kohen. They all come together. A Kohen who can bless another Jew, be'ahava, with love, because being a Isha Chesed is the Kohen that if need be, he could be the one to determine, God forbid, if somebody needs to be pushed away, needs to be cast away temporarily. So, in other words, of course, the Kohen's determination cannot be determined based on his own love for another Jew or exclusively on his own level of kindness. Of course, you need to have the expertise. Of course, you need to have the knowledge of the expert to know if indeed the person is a candidate to be pronounced as Tameh. However, to actually, so to speak, pull that trigger, only a Kohen can do it. Because a Kohen feels the full weight and the seriousness of such a determination, and this will cause him to not leave any stone unturned, to cross every T and dot every I, to make sure that for sure indeed, this Jew is indeed impure, and when he's left with no choice, then he will make this determination. From this we have a special directive, a special lesson in life, a wonderful one. That when we see something that's not good by another Jew, you see another Jew who's not behaving well, or has perhaps their ways are corrupt as far as Torah is concerned, even if it's such a type of Jew that seems to indicate that he has no connection with Yiddishkeit, that he is not fit to be part of the Machane Yisrael, is not fit to be part of the Jewish camp. Tells us that the Torah tells us that even if you're well versed, even if you know all the criteria and you understand the criteria that it takes to make such a determination, the first thing you need to do before you could, or not the first and the ultimate thing you need to do before you can make such a determination, is examine yourself. Are you indeed a Ish HaChesed? Are you indeed full of Avas Yisrael, full of love for another Jew? And if Chas v'Sholem you're lacking any bit of love, of chesed towards another Jew, then if you make this determination, it's not a true determination. If you make a determination that this Jew needs to be cast away, needs to be pushed aside, then that is absolute sheker. It's falsehood. It's not consistent with the Torah. The only time you could make determination is if you are full of Avos Yisrael. Because it's not the affliction itself, it's not the Tzaras itself that makes the person tamei or not. It's the declaration that makes the person tamei. And in order to make such a declaration, you only do it through, quote unquote, a Kohen, a person who is the epitome of chesed. And therefore, when you're not that, you shouldn't be making such determinations. Now, what happens if somebody is not on that level of love for another Jew? Here's where the Rebbe takes the verse and plays it homiletically on the person himself, meaning, so to speak, on the Kohen or on the Chacham himself. If you are not full of Avos Yisrael, if you are jumping to make a determination on another Jew, which is not consistent with the truth, because since you're not coming from a place of pure love and kindness towards another Jew, therefore you shouldn't be making it, then what is the solution? You should isolate yourself. You should, so to speak, isolate yourself until you learn, until you train yourself to look at another Jew with a good eye and to see the good in another Jew. And through this approach, says the Rebbe, through this Ahavas Chinam, then we totally do away with the whole idea of Golus, as it is described in the Medrash, that when it says Hatzarua, the leopard, it actually refers to Golus. So by taking away the root of the problem, we take away the problem itself.